And this does also play very different from any other two-player game that I've ever seen. Although this does have some abstract strategy elements, you're not going to be moving pieces around like in your typical strategy game. Instead, you're mostly going to be putting pieces out that are going to manipulate the board in different ways. There's going to be different goals that each player is trying to go for that they're trying to keep secret from the other player. But of course, if you're paying close attention to what the other player is doing, you might be able to deduce what exactly they are trying to accomplish, assuming that they're not doing a fantastic job of misdirecting you. This is a game that plays over 3 ages, and I'll explain what all of these components are in a second here. But first, I just want to set up the 3 ages that we're going to play, and we have 3 different decks here for each different age, and I've already shuffled them, and we're just going to be grabbing 1 card from each age. Then you're going to be flipping age 1 up and putting it in this slot in the board. After that, we can get rid of all of these cards and just put them back in the box. But let's quickly go over what it is that players are trying to accomplish and how they score victory points in this game. And that's all going to start with dealing 2 of these cards to each of the players. Each of these cards represent different demigods that are also represented by these different tokens here, and then these different trackers at the top. It's really important that you keep these secret from your opponent until the end of the game, but let's say that I was dealt purple and red. That means that it's the purple and red demigod tokens up here that are going to be scoring me victory points at the end of the game, depending on their relative position from each other. The safest way for me to benefit from this is to try and get those 2 tokens as far away from each other as possible, because at the end of the game, I can score based on the difference of the 2. And in this case, I have the purple at the 10 and the red at the 2, so that would score me 8 victory points. Alternatively, I could try and get these 2 tokens to be on the same location at the end of the game. So if I had them both on the 8, then that would also score me 8 victory points. Knowing that these tokens can score in these 2 ways, you're going to want to watch your opponent and see how they are pushing the tokens around, because at the end of the game, you're going to be guessing on this notepad here which 2 of the demigods you think your opponent is assigned to. And that can gain you 3 victory points for getting that correct, but it's actually going to lose you a victory point if you get both of them incorrect. And those are the only way to score victory points in this game, so you can already see how the deduction is a super critical element. But now let's get back to this age card, and I'll let you know exactly how to set up the board. All these X-looking tokens are known as quest tokens, and you can see them over here on the right, and we do have 1 red one that we're going to have to include in the top left corner, but these have just been randomly shuffled, and we'll just place them out according to this card. All those different black sections between the quest tokens that have different icons depicted on them represent these action tokens, and we'll just be putting those out according to this card as well. And then the bit of text at the top of the card is going to outline a specific condition that each player is going to have to check at the end of the age, and then announce to the other player whether or not they currently meet that condition. This isn't an objective or anything like that. It's just giving some additional information to your opponent to help them deduce what exactly you're trying to do. The icons on the bottom of the card correspond to this abyss tracker, which has a token that starts in the middle at the beginning of the age, but throughout the age it can be moved to the left or to the right, and depending on where it ends up, it's going to have the corresponding effect as outlined on this card. This will normally add or remove renown to any of the character tokens that are in the abyss at the end of the age. And what that's going to do is move those associated trackers for those characters, depending on how that tracker resolves. So let's go ahead and set up the board according to this card. And the rest of these red tokens can just be removed, but they can be used in a future age. Then we'll go ahead and flip all of these face up. All the demigods do start off the board at the beginning of each age, so this is exactly how that should be set up. All these tokens up here do start in the middle of the board at the beginning of the game, just like this, but from then on, their position does persist across ages. These 5 tokens here are the action spaces where the different demigods can be placed, and demigods can only move between 3 different spots, either off the board completely, on one of these action locations, or sent to the abyss. These different quest tokens can come in different colors, and they can either feature a sight symbol or an omega symbol, and the sight symbol indicates moving down renown, while the omega symbol indicates moving up renown. I'll explain all of this in more detail as we play through a few turns, because this is a game that just alternates turns back and forth between the 2 players, and on your turn you can choose to take one of 3 different actions. The The first action is to choose any demigod off the board and then place it on any of the open action spots. I might choose to put my red demigod here, which may or may not be a good choice, seeing as I do want to keep my demigod secret from my opponent. And choosing one of my own demigods first might be giving that away, but who knows, maybe that's all part of my strategy. The other thing to note when placing demigods out on these different tokens is that each of these tokens also have a specific action associated with them. Placing a token on the Abyss icon allows you to move the Abyss token either to the left or to the right. Placing a demigod on the Smite action allows you to smite any of the demigods that are currently off the board. And of course, when doing that, they're going to get sent to the Abyss. But these last three action tiles work very similar to each other because whenever a demigod is placed on any of those, you're going to be taking the associated servant tile and then adding it to your supply. Since I put my demigod on the feathers, that means I would get the feathers servant tile. And that would conclude my turn, and then it would become the opponent player's turn, and I'll just have them perform the second possible action, which is to use one of these three god tiles. And to be very clear, this is probably a very bad idea to do so soon in the game, because each of these tiles can only be used once per game by one single player, and also when you use that tile, you do hang on to it and it does cost you a victory point at the end of the game. But these can be very powerful when used in the right moment. The steal allows you to steal any one of your opponent's servant tiles and take it for yourself. The switch allows you to swap any two demigods anywhere out on the board, whereas the smite allows you to smite any demigod anywhere out on the board. And this is more powerful than using the smite action because when you use this tile, you can actually smite straight off the board, and whenever you do that, you're going to be flipping this token over so that it can't be reused. But what I think the opponent player is going to do instead is to use the switch token in order to swap this demigod, let's say with this blue one. And that ends their turn, and it would now come back to me, and I'll use this as an opportunity to show you the third and final possible action that you can perform on your turn, and that's to use a servant tile. But of course, in order to do this, you do need to have a servant tile in your possession. The way these work is that you can slot them in with any location around the perimeter of the board, and they're going to be activating the different quest tiles depending on the type of tile that they are. The feather tile is going to be activating any of the feather quest tokens in the row or column that I pointed at, whereas the scorpion tile does the same thing but for the scorpion quest tiles. And this third one works a little bit differently because it only activates the tile that it's touching. And I'll just go ahead and throw this token here, so it's going to activate any of these quest tokens that also match the feathers. There's only one here, so this one gets activated. And this is going to cause the effect of that tile to any of the demigods that are adjacent to that tile. This shows the omega symbol, which means that it's going to be adding influence, and the only demigod adjacent to it currently is the blue demigod, so that means that the blue demigod is going to move up one influence. That doesn't really do anything for my two characters or my end objective, but who knows, maybe it's a good way to throw off my opponent and make them think that maybe blue is one of my characters. And yes, you and your opponent can have overlap with your characters in this game. But that ends my turn and it goes back to my opponent, and let's say that they're going to take the green demigod and put it on the scorpion here in order to get that scorpion servant token, and then it comes back to me. And I think I'll avoid doing anything with my demigods for a bit just so I don't make it too obvious for my opponent. So I'm going to take this yellow demigod and put it on this action token in order to gain this servant tile. My opponent's demigods are actually the yellow and the cyan, which hasn't been placed out yet. So me putting that yellow there might have messed with their plans just a little bit. Since they have this scorpion servant and I happen to place this where there are no scorpion quest tiles, that means they won't be able to use that to influence this yellow anymore, if that is what they wanted to do. So what they might want to do is claim that they want to block me from placing any of my demigods next to this very powerful quest token. So they're going to take their own and place it on this action space, blocking off that quest token, but then also taking the action of moving the abyss marker to the left. Not that it really matters right now. But then it comes back to me and I might use this pink character to place on this smite action space in order to smite one of the demigods currently out of play. And I'll smite this purple one, sending it down here, which means at the end of the round, purple is going to be moving down to influence since this was moved to the left. But now it goes back to my opponent's turn, and they have no more action spaces where they can place demigods, which means that they only have two options. They can either use one of these god tiles, or they can place their servant tile. I think the smart play here is to place the servant tile across the center. I think this is a really good play by them because this does have the omega symbol matching the scorpion with a number 2 in it, which means that the blue character is going to be moving up 2 spaces here, which really does make me suspect that one of their cards is the blue demigod. But because they put this token here and it also matches this quest tile, it's also going to be moving the cyan up a single space, which is small enough that I might not suspect it too much, but it does help them with one of their cards. Now it comes back to me, and I also only have the 2 options of placing my servant tile or using one of these god tiles, and I think I'm going to try and mislead my opponent by doubling down on the yellow. I'm the one who placed that there, and now I'm going to use this token to give it 2 omega, which is going to move it up twice on this track. It's a really powerful move, so it could be really effective at getting my opponent to suspect that I am yellow. And that could be the case because I said you can have overlaps in this game. But the fact is I don't have yellow and I'm trying to bluff, and really all I did here was help my opponent. And now that all the action spaces have been used and all the servants have been placed, that's going to be triggering the end of the age. We're then going to check the abyss and resolve any effects over here, which means that purple's going to be moving down by 2. And I am playing horribly here because the next thing we have to do is reveal to the other player whether or not we are currently meeting the condition at the top of this card. And the current condition is, do we have one of our demigods between 4 and 6 renown? I just made the purple go there, and it's the only demigod between 4 and 6. And now I have to tell my opponent that yes, I do have a demigod that meets that condition. So they know without a doubt that one of my demigods is purple. The better play for myself would have been to pick any one of the other demigods to put it in the abyss to force it into that condition, so that hopefully one of them would have been my opponent's and they would have had to tell me. But now we just go ahead and remove all the demigods and put them back off to the side of the board. Remove the servant tokens, reset the abyss tracker, and reveal the next age card. This makes a few modifications to the board, and for the red tile we can remove the old one and then put in a new one in the location it specifies here. Move all the action tiles into the appropriate locations. And the next condition that we're going to have to reveal is if we have any demigods over 10 renown. The rounds continue like this, back and forth, with the players either placing a demigod on an action location and taking that action, using one of the god tiles, or placing one of their servant tiles. At the end of the third act, each player is going to be guessing which 2 demigods they think their opponent was assigned, and if they were correct, they're going to be gaining victory points for that, and if they got both of them wrong, then they're going to be losing a victory point. But then each player is also going to be gaining victory points based on the relative position of their 2 demigods around the influence track. Because I had purple and red, that would currently gain me 2 victory points, and my opponent had cyan and yellow, which would currently gain them 1. They also lose a victory point for using one of those god tiles, but after all that is accounted for, the player with the most victory points wins the game, and if there's a tie, it's going to be going to whoever guessed the most demigods correctly, or whoever used the least amount of god tiles. Definitely another really solid design here from IV Games. I had a lot of fun with this, just even playing against myself here, even though I knew exactly which cards my opponent had. But what I really like is the way that these different conditions come into play at the end of a round, because if you do suspect a certain demigod of your opponent, you can try and force it into meeting the criteria of this card so that they have to reveal that information to you. I also really love finding quality 2-player games because they are the games that I tend to get to the table the most, and I really love finding 2-player games that offer something very different from anything else in my collection, and this one definitely checks all those boxes. It also looks fantastic as well, which pretty much goes without saying for an IV game at this point, but if you are a fan of satisfying games with satisfying components, definitely check this one out, and I will have it linked down below.